Good morning, everyone. I already forgot my phone because I had to be able to see the chat. We are still reading R.G. Collingwood's The Idea of History, and we are part 8. You're listening to the audiobook. I'm just Oh, I don't know why it says guitar. Oh, here we go. Now switch to the proper channel. Fine. Okay, whatever. Sorry about that. Now I'll start the audiobook. Okay. Subsection 8, Anti-Cartesianism, Locke, Berkeley, and Hume. Second, and so far as its historical consequences went, by the far more effective attack on Cartesianism was that delivered by Lockean school accumulating in Hume. At first, the empiricism of this school, though already in conscious opposition to Descartes, had no conscious relation to the problem of historical thought. But as the school developed it gradually, it became clear the point of view which it was working out could be used in the interests of history, if only in a negative sense, that is, in order to destroy the Cartesianism which had banished history from a place on the map of knowledge. Locke and Berkeley show in their philosophical writings no special preoccupation with the problems of historical thought, though Locke's description of his own method as the historical plane method shows that he was not unaware of the relation between his own anti-Cartesianism and the study of history. In his essay, Introduction, subsection 2, he says that by this he means that he aims at giving an account of the ways whereby our understandings come to attain those notions of things we have. Our notions of things are thus treated by Locke exactly as manners and customs are treated by Vico, the Cartesian problem of the relation between ideas and things being in each case ruled out as a problem that does not arise. But in France, the men of the Enlightenment, Voltaire and the encyclopedists, whose interests were definitely oriented towards history, shows that this philosophy was in some way peculiarly adapted to serve as a weapon for historical thought, first in its defense and then in its counterattack against the tradition of Descartes. Revolt against Cartesianism is in fact the chief negative feature of French thought in the 18th century. Its chief positive features are, first, its increasingly historical tone, and secondly, its adoption of the Lockean type of philosophy. And it is obvious that these three features were mutually interdependent. The main points of the Lockean philosophy are easily enumerated. In each case, I think it would be clear that the point is negatively anti-Cartesian and positively a contribution towards a reorientation of philosophy in the direction of history. 1. The denial of innate ideas and the insistence that knowledge comes through experience, the conception of innate ideas as an anti-historical conception. If all knowledge consists in making explicit our innate ideas, and if all such ideas are present as potentialities in every human mind, all possible knowledge can theoretically be produced afresh by every human being for himself by his own unaided efforts, and there's no need for that corporate building up of the body of knowledge, which is the special work of history. If all knowledge is based on experience, it is an historical product. Truth, as Bacon had already reasserted, is the daughter of time. The best knowledge is a fruit of the ripest and richest experience. Thus, an historical view of knowledge is already implicit in the first book of Locke's essay. 2. The denial of any argument intended to bridge an alleged gulf between ideas and things, the denial grounded on the doctrine that knowledge is concerned not with a reality distinct from our ideas, but with the agreement and disagreement of our ideas themselves. As applied to a physical science, this doctrine is obviously paradoxical. For in the physical science, we seem to aim at the knowledge of something incapable of being reduced to ideas. But as applied to our historical knowledge of human institutions like morality, language, law, and politics, it is not only devoid of paradox, it is the most natural way of looking at these things, as we have already seen. 3. The denial of abstract ideas and the insistence that all ideas are concrete, this, which Berkeley showed to be implicit in Locke, is paradoxical, as applied to mathematics and physics, but once more is obviously the natural way of thinking about history, where knowledge consists not of abstract generalizations, but of concrete ideas. The conception of human knowledge was falling necessarily short of absolute... Why does it say I'm offline? Okay, it's still going, sorry. I'm going to start from subsection 4 again. The conception of human knowledge as falling necessarily short of absolute truth and certainty, but capable of attaining, in Locke's words, such certainty as our condition needs, or, as Hume puts it, that reason is incapable of dispelling the clouds of doubt. But nature herself, our human nature, suffices for that purpose and lays upon us in our practical life an absolute necessity to live and talk and act like other people. This is a cold comfort for the Cartesian intent upon the problems of mathematics and physics, but it is a solid basis for historical knowledge, that being precisely concerned with what Locke calls our condition. The actual state of human affairs, or the way in which men live and act. The English school, then, is reorientating philosophy in a direction of history, though as a whole it is not clearly aware that it is doing so. Nevertheless, Hume is less blind to the situation than his predecessors were. There must be some significance in the case of so determined and a profound a thinker, in the fact that he had deserted philosophical studies in favor of historical at about the age of 35. If in the light of his later interest we look through his philosophical works in search of references to history, we find a few such references. Not very many, but quite enough to show that history already interested him, and that he was thinking about it philosophically, and that he was curiously confident in the power of his own philosophical theories to explain the problems to which they gave rise. Of these references I shall consider two. In the first, we find Hume playing the principles of his philosophy to the case of historical knowledge conceived in the spirit of the methods worked out by the scholars of the late 17th century. Quote, "We believe that Caesar was killed in the Senate House on the Ides of March, and that is because this fact is established on the unanimous testimony of historians, who agree to assign this precise time and place to that event. Here are certain characters and letters present to either our memory or senses, which characters we likewise remember to have been used as the signs of certain ideas, and these ideas were either in the minds of such were immediately present at that action, and received the ideas directly from its existence, or they were derived from the testimony of others, and that again from another testimony, by a visible graduation, till we arrive at those who were eyewitnesses and spectators of the event. 'Tis obvious all this chain of argument and connection of causes and effects is the first founded on whose characters or letters which are seen or remembered, and without the authority of either memory or the senses our whole reasoning would be chimerical and without foundation. End quote. Here, the historian's data are given him by direct perception, or what Hume calls impressions. He actually sees certain documents in front of him. The question is, why do those impressions cause him to believe that Caesar was killed at a certain time and place? Hume's answer is easy. The association of the visible signs with certain ideas is a matter of fact, attested by our memory. The association being constant. We believe that people who originally committed those words to paper meant by them what we should ourselves mean. And thus, we believe, assuming their veracity, that they believed what they said, viz., that they actually saw Caesar die at the time and place. This is a quite satisfactory solution for the problem of history as it appears to an historian of the early 18th century, who could be content if he had been shown historical knowledge to be a system of reasonable beliefs based on testimony. But if the philosopher could go on to show, as Hume did, that no other kind of knowledge was more than a system of reasonable beliefs, the claim of history to a place on the map of knowledge was vindicated. Secondly, Hume was quite aware that the contemporary philosophical thought had cast doubt on the validity of historical knowledge, and he goes out of his way to rebut the stock argument, especially because that argument might claim, unjustly as he thinks, to be supported by his own principles. Quote, "'Tis evident there is no point in ancient history of which we can have any assurance, but by passing through many millions of causes and effects, and through the chain of arguments of almost an immeasurable length, before the knowledge of the fact could come to the first historian, it must be conveyed through many mouths, and after it is committed to writing, each new copy is a new object, of which the connection with the foregoing is known only by experience and observation. Perhaps, therefore, it may be concluded, from the preceding reasoning, that the evidence of all ancient history must now be lost, as the chain of causes increases and runs to a greater length." Hume goes on to argue that this is contrary to common sense. The evidence of ancient history does not thus decay with mere length. The solution is that, quote, though the links are innumerable, yet they are all of the same kind, and depend on the fidelity of printers and copyists. There is no variation in the steps. After we know one, we know all of them. After we have made one, we can have no scruple as to the rest. End quote. Thus we see that already in his 20s, when he wrote the treatise, Hume had reflected on the problem of historical thought, and had decided that Cartesian objections to it were invalid, and had arrived at a philosophical system in which his own opinion rebutted those objections and placed history on a footing at least as sound as that any other science. I would not go so far as to call his entire philosophy a reasoned defense of historical thought, but that was undoubtedly one of the things which made it which it implicitly undertook. And it seemed to me that when he had finished his philosophical work and asked himself what he had accomplished in it, he could have said with justice that one thing at any rate was the determination that history was a legitimate and valid type of knowledge. More legitimate, in fact, than most others, because not promising more than it could perform, and not depending on any questionable metaphysical hypothesis. In the general skepticism to which he was led, the sciences which most suffered were those whose claims were the most dogmatic and absolute. The whirlwind of his philosophical criticism leveling all thought to the position of natural and reasonable belief. Left undamaged, the fabric of history as a type of thought which alone could be satisfied with that condition. Nevertheless, Hume remained conscious of the full impact of his philosophy upon history, and as a writer of history, he ranks with the men of the Enlightenment, barred like them from the scientific history by a substantialistic view of human nature, which was really quite inconsistent with his philosophical principles. Subsection 9, the Enlightenment. In his historical work, Hume and his slightly older contemporary Voltaire, stand at the head of a new school of historical thought. Their work, and that of their followers, may be defined as the historiography of the Enlightenment. By the Enlightenment, Aufklärung is meant that endeavor, so characteristic of the 18th century, to secularize every department of human life and thought. It was a revolt not only against the power of institutional religion, but against religion as such. Voltaire regarded himself as the leader of a crusade against Christianity, fighting under the motto of "Écrasez l'infâme, écrasez l'infâme," where l'infâme meant superstition, religion, considered as a function of what was backward and barbarous in human life. The philosophical theory underlying this movement was that certain forms of mental activity are primitive forms, destined to perish when the mind arrives at maturity. According to Vico, poetry is the natural mode in which the savage or childish mind expresses itself. The sublimest poetry, he maintains, is the poetry of the barbarous or heroic ages, the poetry of Homer or Dante. As man develops, reason prevails over imagination and passion, and poetry is displaced by prose. Intermediately between the poetic or purely imaginative way of presenting its experience to itself and the prosaic or purely rational, Vico placed a third, the mythical or semi-imaginative. This is the stage of development which puts the whole experience of religious This is the stage of development which puts upon the whole experience a religious interpretation. Thus, Vico thinks of art, religion, and philosophy as three different ways in which the human mind expresses or formulates its whole experience. They cannot live peaceably side by side. Their relation to each other is one of a dialectic succession in a definite order. But it follows that such a religious attitude towards life is destined to be superseded by a rational or philosophical one. No such theory was constantly formulated by either Voltaire or Hume, but had such a theory had been brought to their notice, they might have accepted it and identified themselves and their colleagues with the agency which was actually bringing the religious era of human history to an end and inaugurating a non-religious rational era. Actually, their polemic attitude towards religion was too violent and one-sided to have received support from any such theory of its place in human history. For them, it was a thing devoid of all positive value forever, or whatever. It was just sheer error, due to unscrupulous and calculating hypocrisy of a class of beings called priests, who they seem to have thought invented it to serve as an instrument of dominion over the mass of men. Terms like religion, priest, Middle Ages, barbarism were for such persons not historical or philosophical or sociological terms with a definite scientific meaning, as they were for Vico, but they're simply terms of abuse. They had an emotional, not a conceptual significance. As soon as a term like religion or barbarism has a conceptual significance, the thing that goes by such a name has to be regarded as something with a positive function in human history, and therefore not a mere evil or error, but a thing with its own proper value in its own proper place. A truly historical view of human history sees everything in that history as having its own raison d'être, and coming into existence into order and to serve the needs of the men whose minds have corporately created it. To think that any phase of history as altogether irrational is to look at it not as an historian, but as a publicist, a polemic writer of tracts for the times. Thus, the historical outlook of the Enlightenment was not genuinely historical. In its main motive, it was polemical and anti-historical. For this reason, writers like Voltaire and Hume did very little to improve the methods of historical research. They took over the methods devised in the preceding generations by men like Mabillon and Tillemont and the Bollandists, and even these methods they did not use in their really scholarly spirit. They were not sufficiently interested in history for its own sake to persevere in the task of reconstructing the history of obscure and remote periods. Voltaire openly proclaimed that no securely based historical knowledge was attainable for events earlier than those close of the 15th century. Hume's History of England is a very slight and sketchy piece of work until he comes to the same period, the age of the Tudors. The real cause of this restriction is the interest to the modern period was that with their narrow conception of reason that they had no sympathy for and therefore no insight into. What from their point of view were being non-rational periods of human history. They only began to be interested in history at the point where it began to be a history of a modern spirit akin to their own, a scientific spirit. In economic terms, this meant the spirit of modern industry and commerce. In political terms, it meant the spirit of enlightened and despotism. They had no conception of institutions as created by the spirit of a people in its historical development. They had conceived themselves as inventions, artifices devised by the ingenious thinkers and imposed by them on the mass of the people. Their idea of religion was due to a priestcraft as was merely an application of the same principle. The only one they had understood to a phase of history where it did not apply. The Enlightenment, in its narrower sense, as an essentially polemical and negative movement, a crusade against religion, never rose higher than its source, and Voltaire remained its best and most characteristic expression. But it developed in various directions without losing its original character. Based as it was on the idea that human life is and has always been, in the main, blind, irrational business. But it is capable of being converted into something rational. It is contained in itself the germs of two immediate developments: a backward-looking and more strictly historical development, which could exhibit past history as the play of irrational forces, and a forward-looking or more practical or political development, forecasting and endeavoring to bring about a millennium in which the rule of reason shall have been established. A. As examples of first tendency, we may quote Montesquieu and Gibbon. Montesquieu had the merit of seizing upon the differences between the different nations and different cultures, but he misunderstood the essential character of these differences. Instead of explaining their history by reference to human reason, he thought it was due to differences in climate and geography. Man, in other words, is regarded as part of nature, and the explanation of historical events is sought in the facts of the natural world. History so conceived would become a kind of natural history of man, or anthropology, where institutions appear not as free inventions of human reason, but in the course of its development, but as the necessary effects of natural causes. Montesquieu, in fact, conceived human life as a reflection of geographical and climatic conditions, not otherwise than the life of plants. And this implies that historical changes are simply different ways in which one single and unchangeable thing, human nature, reacts to different stimuli. This misconception of human nature and human action is the real flaw in any theory which, like Montesquieu's, attempts to explain the features of a civilization by reference to geographical facts. To be sure, there is an intimate relation between any culture and its natural environment, but what determines its character is not the facts of that environment in themselves, but what man is able to get out of them, and that depends on what kind of man he is. As an historian, Montesquieu was uncritical in the extreme, but his insistence on the relation of man to his environment, even though he misconceived the character of that relation, and on the economic factors in which his view underlay political institutions, was important not only in itself, but for the future development of historical thought. Gibbon, a typical Enlightenment historian, agreed with all this to an extent of conceiving history as anything but an exhibition of human wisdom. But instead of finding its positive principle in the laws of nature, which, as it were, replace for Montesquieu the wisdom of man and create for him the social organizations which he could not create for himself, Gibbon finds the motive force of history in human irrationality itself, and his narrative displays what he calls the triumph of barbarism and religion. But in order that there may be such a triumph over there, must be first something for this irrationality to triumph over. Thus, Gibbon places on the beginning of his narrative in a golden age when human reason ruled over a happy world, the Antonine period. This conception of a golden age in the past gives Gibbon a rather special place among Enlightenment historians and assimilates him on the one hand to his predecessors, the humanists of the Renaissance, and on the other hand to his successors, the romantics of the close of the 18th century. Okay, and that's it for today. That's 10 pages. We're on page 80, part B, the influence of Christianity and the Enlightenment. Yep, the idea of history, R.G. Collingwood. Excellent book. Get a chance, read it. I'm now done with the reading, so if you want to listen to more of the audiobook, you're going to have to go to the next video, which will come out tomorrow when I do another live reading. See y'all later. Now I'm just going to check out the chat. Yo, hello everybody. I'm at the very top of the chat. Hi, Soapy Jim, Skincare, Hiccup with me. Hi, hello, Cosmic Garo. Thank you for. Oh, I'm glad you like the art, Cosmic Garo. These are all. That's all my own art. Well, that's my old palette. This is a derivative work that I created. It's from Caravaggio's Supper at Emmaus. I took it and put my own spin on it for my own little myth that I created, and that's also one of mine. It's called Apophenia. I have not read the Jurassic Park book. Hello, Damago. Doma. Bonjour. Fred, yeah, I do kind of look like Fred Weasley. I can see that. Why lawyer? Interesting. A very interesting book. I should check that out maybe. That's funny, Marcus. Duncan Dill. Thank you, Duncan. I like reading books for people. That's what's up, Dodge Hellcat? I'm not trying to get views. What I'm trying to do, Mr. Doge Hellcat RV is or Dodge Hellcat RV is create audiobooks for people. Because the books that I want to listen to usually are expensive and I don't feel like having to pay for that. So, and I know other people don't want to too. So, I'm just creating I'm reading the books that I got that I couldn't find audiobooks so that way other people have them too. I like Voltaire too. His book Candide was pretty nice. Yeah, and then you say Candide was one of his books known for that. Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Dodge. Oh, I'm glad you're eating. Hello, Monsieur Lemonoffson. I can't. I don't know how to pronounce that. No Face Street. What's up, Alligator? What's up? Hey, Slady, how you doing? Hey, Casso. I'm not a philosopher. How's it going, Casso? How you doing? I like to read philosophy. I like to study philosophy. I'm not a philosopher. I am nowhere near smart enough to be a philosopher. I like it because I feel like it helps me kind of figure out life or kind of get a handle on stuff. You know, it's hard to. Well, like I thought like I don't know. I go in between. Like I consider myself someone that's into philosophy, so I want to call myself a philosopher. But then I think about it more than like a couple seconds. I'm like, no, I'm not smart enough to be a philosopher. Yeah. My pride does get the better of me sometimes. Casso. Sometimes I do get full of myself. I think of myself as more than I am. But yes, I have no PhD, not college educated. I just read books. I would love to consider myself a philosopher. But if I'm being real with myself, I don't think I am. Because like the more I read this stuff, the more I'm like I have questions. I guess I guess if we're talking about a philosopher as someone who is philosophy, who loves wisdom, a lover of wisdom, then yes, I am that. But I want to be a philosopher, but I don't think I'm anywhere near the level of mind or that any of these writers uh, are. You know, I would love to be a philosopher someday, but who knows? What is a philosopher? Is it? Oh, what's up, man? Do I have understanding? See, that is what freaks me out, dude. Casso, what is understanding in itself? What is it to understand? Because that's what AI, like, as much as I am not into AI art, I do think AI is a very interesting look into figuring out what is understanding, what is consciousness itself. Um, because to understand something, is it to have, do you mean by understanding the instinctual feel for something? Like after practice, like with my guitar, I understand how to play the guitar because I have an instinctual, I can pick up a guitar and then play it. But yeah, as you're saying too, but I'm saying like, let's go further than just surface words. Like, oh, we know what understanding is, but what is the mechanism by which we grasp something? Where is that is it metaphysical? Is it biological? We still don't know where the center of consciousness is. Scientists are always narrowing down it, but then they can never, and then it just slips right through their fingers. I didn't. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not. I said hello. Um, I did not ignore your Rayo men. But is so? What do you mean by learned behavior? So you say learned behavior. What is it to learn? Is is there a conscious choice in learning? Do we learn things regardless whether we want to or not? Or is it possible that we also can't learn some stuff? You ever notice someone that like no matter how hard they try, they can't figure out how to do something, even though it's very simple for maybe you? Like I have that experience a lot. A lot of things are very hard for me that are very simple for other people. Um, but is learned behavior merely environmentally programmed behavior for ourselves? Is it because of our environment and it gives us feedback loops to an extent that we automatically, unconsciously, not understanding per se, but we just react to certain stimuli based on our unconscious um, mechanics, essentially. We are, well, it to understand, is that a choice? Because if it's not a choice, there is no understanding. Understanding is an illusion of our consciousness. I would love to just talk to you at some point. Hello, Anas. How are you doing? Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not that smart. This is just stuff that I think about. I'm autistic, so I just keep on overthinking about stuff. So I read and I think, and I like to think about the universe. I well, I'm not mystifying the obvious. See, that's the thing is philosophy itself does not take things for being obvious. If you take things at the surface level, we already know that our senses um, can mislead us into different conclusions. So I'm not mystifying the obvious. I'm trying to reform the question so that way we understand the answer better. Illusion is not a mystical word. Illusion is a actual process, bro. It's when you have the presented appearance is different than the cause. A mirage is an illusion. Illusions are real. So but what I mean by the illusion of consciousness is that we are very high order beings. I don't think that we can deny that. Um, we have a ego, you could say, an I-ness to us, something in us that observes things, a phenomenology. We can have a subjective, um, exactly. An illusion is a false or misleading perception. Hello, Saravana. So something that misleads or deceives intellectually. Yeah, and so that's not a mystical word. It's something that actually does exist. Um, which is what I said. I was just reading a book and then I started talking to Mr. Casso here. Where is it? I can't see the proof. To me, it's not mystical. The I would say it's more of a like an artifact of consciousness. Kind of like when you're recording a video and if you put it at a certain resolution, it things become blocky and they don't look right. It's you can okay, actually I have a perfect example of an illusion. See that painting? There's nothing there. There's just black lines. I did that unconsciously without trying to create an image or right without trying to create a person or anything. But if you look there, that circle and the weird way I put those lines makes it appear as a person. The title of this painting is called Epiphania. Epiphania is when, if you look, there's an eye here, an eye here, a nose, and a mouth. Epiphania is when you see a face in things that doesn't actually exist. That is the illusion. Consciousness itself creates illusions, or actually, the brain creates illusions and presents it to consciousness based on the physical stimuli that we have, because we have certain heuristics or schemas in our mind that our brain uses as shortcuts to recognize things. But illusions are apparent to the senses, and they I think you're getting stuck on the wrong thing. You're missing the forest for the trees, bro. You're hearing my words, but speaking of understanding, you're not understanding what I'm saying. Oh, the book is R.G. Collingwood's The Idea of History. Sorry, already done for the reading for today. I'm gonna have to stop in a minute and get ready for work. But I love discussing this. This is really fun, Mr. Casso. I would love to talk with you more on this. This is really fun. Thank you guys for coming and discussing this with me. Because the only way for us, the only way to find truth, or not to find truth, there is no finding of truth. The only way to speak truth is through a dialectical process of humans, talking about our different perspectives and then seeing what is actually there through those matching up of those things. But I think of truth as a function of language. Truth is not something to discover, it's a property of statements. If I state something, the sky is blue, right now that's not true. It's a quality of the statement because right now it's overcast and the sky looks white. But the sky is technically blue, but the clouds aren't there. But it's also not actually blue. So it depends on the point of the statement. But anyways, yes, I understand what you're saying. Truth is experience. I agree with that. Truth is the quality of the sentences as close as they match up to reality as experienced. So something that's closer to reality as experienced is more true, or accuracy, essentially. That's what I kind of see as truth. I don't think there's something to no truth to discover. When people talk about the oh, so you're a Sagittarius too, cool. How do we know outside experience is actually there? See, we don't, and that's the thing that George Berkeley kind of fell into, and he became a solipsist, where he thinks that we're all in the mind of God, and that there's only one consciousness, and it's all kind of a dream. I have a similar idea, but I don't deny physicality. I don't think that this is all merely consciousness. I think there is a lot of things that go through that. I'm glad that you find this entertaining. And yes, Casso, I drew an unconscious painting that turned out to be a person. That is a technique of mine. I actually have many paintings. Not get my hand in here. This one is from a photo that I did. This one I just put black on one side, white on the other, and then just started putting paint on there, and then it became that. Most of what I do, that one is intentional, but most of what I do, I don't have all my stuff up, is what I call unconscious art. I don't know what a sleeper build is. Yes, I am very fond of Jim Morrison. The Doors are very interesting. Very interesting band. I like his weird ass poetry. See you later, man. Have a great day, Casso. Yeah, me too, bro. To Mr. Ryan. But I think, see, the thing is, we all, it's like the elephant. The elephant with the blind people feeling it. One person says it's a snake when feeling the trunk. The other one says it's a broom when feeling the tail. Another person says it's a tree when feeling the leg. You know, everybody touches only a tiny part and then says, "I know what it is." So I don't claim to know what things are. I claim to have suspicions and ideas. But I think that I've had what people call mystical experiences before. They can be induced through meditation. They can also just happen. They can also be induced through certain substances, depending on what your personal preference is, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to attain. Um, but I think a lot of people waste their time with it because they start chasing mystical experiences. And it's like, oh yeah, it makes me so cool that I've experienced the stuff that the prophets experienced. Who cares? You're gonna die anyways. None of the stuff's gonna matter. I am not better than you. No one is better than anyone. To answer Mr. Ryan, we are all merely humans. Value is a construct that humans used to segregate things, and differentiate things as useful in their environment, and then it kind of goes overboard from there. Unfortunately. Oh, that's dope, dude. That is so freaking dope. Yeah. Mystical experiences, there are no words that can describe how they feel. Um what's going on? Nothing much. I actually got to peace out now because I got to get going to work. Got to get ready. Not okay. So opinion this I Smitty Werberman Jensen. I will answer this last question because I fucking love cheese. I haven't tried blue cheese yet. But but it looks weird. So it freaks me out. I do want to try it though. Oh, no, I'm not in college. I've never been to school. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Cross-eyed Sands. Yes, certainly, Connor. I'll read that for you in just a minute. Freaking hilarious, by the way. But I gotta get going. Full-time work calls, and maybe I'll sing on my way to work. See ya then.